I see some familiar faces on here. Super exciting. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I just want to start off by introducing myself. My name is Michael Myers. Yes, that is my real name. And I have the privilege of serving the SOM community as Director of Admissions for Inclusion and Diversity. And what that really means is that I get to spend a good amount of my day understanding and strategizing from the different affinity clubs and groups that we have represented at the institution, and also the journeys that some of you all take when you're applying to the MBA program here. And so I'm really excited to kick off part 3 of this engaging series called Inside the Community, where we're focusing tonight on our LGBTQ plus student experience. And so it's an awesome privilege to have some students from our very own out of office group, some leaders and members alike, and I will ask them to go ahead and introduce themselves. So Pauline, why don't we start with you and then you can pass it on to the next person.
Yeah, sure, of course. So my name is Pauline. I'm a first-year MBA student at Yale SOM. So just started in August. I'm a Silver Scar, so I joined the MBA right after undergrad. I'm originally French, grew up in France a little bit. Also, I've lived in Shanghai and New York growing up. Then I went to undergrad in London, studied at the London School of Economics, a Bachelor of Science in Management, so also business. And then also went on exchange at the University of Michigan, then back to London. And then I joined Yale this year, finally. My background is in management consulting. So I was working at Accenture in New York last summer as a consulting analyst. And yeah, so I think my favorite thing at SOM is really like building a good sense of community with people. So I'm part of a couple of affinity clubs, so the Yale SOM, but also the out of office club, which is the LGBT club. And it's great. And one thing I'm super grateful for is just like meeting diverse students at Yale. By diverse, I mean diverse in terms of culture, backgrounds, interests. So it's been very interesting so far. I'm loving it. And yeah, I'm really excited to get engaged in more maybe global opportunities this year. So that's one thing I'm looking forward to.
Perfect. I can take it next. So my name is Trey. My pronouns are he, him. I originally grew up in the suburbs of Indianapolis, Indiana. I went to the University of Notre Dame for my undergrad, where I studied sociology and Spanish. Thought at the time that I wanted to go to law school, went through the whole consulting recruiting process, ended up with a consulting offer, and then kind of had an existential crisis at the end of senior year where I was like, I don't want to do consulting, and instead took a hard left turn and moved to the Grand Canyon, where I led bike tours for about 5 months and worked at a coffee shop out there. Went and led snowmobile tours in Yellowstone for a few months before eventually moving to the corporate world and working in financial litigation in Miami, Florida for about 3 years. So like I said, was really working in financial litigation, did asset forfeiture defense, but after working in the law space for a few years, kind of without a law degree, reached my kind of like maximum potential that I could, and was at a point where I either needed to switch jobs or go to grad school or go to law school, but really didn't want to go to law school at that point, but wanted to make a pivot to finance, so decided to pursue an MBA. Decided on Yale because, as you know, you will hear about from us, and I'm sure many other people that you talk to at SOM. Just loved the community. I wanted to kind of pivot to a school that would allow me to make a pivot like into finance with my career without necessarily being inundated in the finance bro type of culture. And SOM was the place that would allow me to do that successfully. So absolutely love that. Will be fully leaning into the finance bro vibe after graduating. I will be doing investment banking with the financial institutions group at Wells Fargo in Charlotte, North Carolina after I graduate. But over the course of my first year, really have made some wonderful connections. Also had the opportunity to travel to Bhutan with one of my classes as a part of an international experience, which I'm sure you've read about in doing some of your research on SOM. There's a huge emphasis on international experiences and learning here, so I'm more than happy to talk about that. Yeah, and for the rest of the year, really looking forward to really solidifying the connections I made in this first year. Excited for so many of the different like programming that we have coming up, from formals to the Harvard Yale game. And yeah, and really, spending my time focusing on friendships and building those connections now that I thankfully have a job locked down. But I'll pass it to Ariel to introduce herself.
Thanks so much, Trey. And I don't think I realized you walked on a job. That's amazing. Congratulations. My name is Ariel. I use she, her pronouns. I'm originally from the Washington, D.C. area, from Arlington, Virginia. I did my undergrad at the College of William and Mary, where I studied psychology and marketing. And then afterwards, headed to the D.C. area, where I did consulting for a few years before working at AARP, which is like a large nonprofit geared toward older adults. So there I ran the partnerships arm of their startup accelerator. So I worked on building partnerships with test beds, investors, and large corporations to help accelerate the startups that we were working with who were building products for older adults. Through that experience, I really liked the mission-driven nature of the work, and I really liked working with startups, but I realized that we were seeing a lot of kind of the same issues recur over time. And so I wanted to kind of work at a larger tech company and really kind of understand how those companies work at scale. And that is why I decided to pivot to SOM. I felt like it was a really great opportunity to kind of like stay in the impact space and keep that and society lens. And I also really liked how interdisciplinary the school is. I think it has like the highest proportion of dual degrees. I liked that people took classes outside of the business school. And so I've been really excited about my experience here and have gotten to take some really amazing classes. I currently spent, I guess I'm a second year MBA. So I spent my summer in Seattle at Microsoft, and I'll be heading back there after this year ends, which will be fun, but sad to leave SOM. And I think my favorite part has also been the community that I've built here. And I've really especially loved the queer community. It was something that was really important to me when I was looking at business schools, and SOM stood out in that regard in terms of the community that exists here for LGBTQ plus students. And I'm sure I'll speak to other aspects of my background, but really excited to be here tonight and excited to see you all.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I feel like one of my favorite pastimes is stopping you all in the hallway and figuring out where you're at in your journeys. And so huge congratulations for landing these roles. I'm excited because that means I get to use you some more before you get out of here now that you're not so busy recruiting. Pauline, your time is coming, my friend, so hang tight. Anyhow, let me just tell you all what to expect for the evening. So we're going to speak. You all have had an opportunity to submit some questions when you registered for the event. And we also have some questions that I want to ask the panelists today. And so we're going to spend the next few minutes sort of chatting about community and what that looks like and what it might be like for you to be here in our community as a student. After that, we're going to stop the recording and we're going to head into breakout rooms. And each student has elected to host their own separate breakout room where you all have the opportunity to unmute yourselves, turn your cameras on, and engage in authentic conversation and hopefully get some of your pressing questions answered. And so without further ado, I'd love to jump into this, It's very important, I think, to remember that there are many intersectional identities at play, especially at this stage in your process. And each of us here on this screen hold different intersectional identities. And so while we'll be focusing primarily on the topic of LGBTQ and the experience of students here, we want to make sure that we recognize that we're doing so in light of other intersectional identities as well, right? And so at Yale, the larger umbrella to our DE&I efforts it's called Belonging at Yale, right? And so some of you may have attended Belonging Days, some of you may have seen this branding around, and it definitely maps back to some strategic initiatives that the university is taking to ensure that not only Yale SOM, but every school and unit at the university is in alignment with our plans and goals from the core. And so I'm curious to know if maybe one or two of you can speak to what or how it's been at SOM as an LGBTQ student, and maybe a particular experience that may highlight a sense of belonging for you. And anyone can start.
So my very first encounter with SOM was, so I was still back home in New York, even before like joining SOM at all. And so one of our friends from out of office with the LGBT club organized, an event to get to know each other. So that was the first friend I made. And, they really like gave me a taste of what SOM was going to be like. So very welcoming people. And that was my first taste of like feeling included and yeah,
I feel like SOM, I mean, like the queer community at SOM is super strong. I feel like it's like a lot of my good friends are that I've friends that I've made through the club. I'm like a lead of the club now, and I feel like a lot of the work we do is around like building community in all kinds of ways, and like between grad schools and within SOM. I feel like it's like hard to kind of understate like how impactful it's been for my experience. I wonder if Trey, you want to talk a little bit about the retreat that you led, or Ramba specifically in terms of events that might be fun memories for you. I didn't get to go to either.
Yeah, I think for me, you know, I think when it comes to like building a creative and inclusive culture with with the queer community, I think first, I think we understand that like this is really an opportunity for people to grow and explore and make pivots and transitions in their lives, right? And that's like obviously like there's a professional aspect associated with that, but there is also the personal aspect. So one thing that I think, you know, Ariel and Pauline as like leaders of the out of office group we were talking about today in our meeting is, you know, like we really want to make sure that the people who are out and proud and loud with their identities like can do that and feel that they have the space to do that, but also that, you know, people who are exploring or who might be closeted also have a space to do that. So like what I've really been encouraged by is the culture that the second years who left last year really set for us, and like how it is that we can build that culture for people here. So like if you've been to campus or if you've like, you know, seen pictures of Yale SOM, you know, like it's a big glass building. You can see all the way through it. So like whenever we host like an out of office event in SOM, we really focus on like including allies. So people who are closeted or don't feel, you know, welcome with the, like being out with their identity feel welcome in that space, which I think is a really beautiful thing that they've done in years past, which is something that we really carry on while also really protecting like queer specific spaces and the programming and the events that we plan that might not be in Evans Hall. And I think that has really allowed me to like feel like you know, like I'm being like someone who's, you know, been out for a while, to feel like very welcome in that space. But also to like, I've noticed that it provides space for people like who you might not suspect are queer to like come up to you and like share that identity. And I think that's been really encouraging to me, to see. I will also say like, you know, growing up in Indiana and then like moving to like rural Arizona and then Montana and Florida, not exactly places that are known for being having the most inclusive legislation for queer people. And I've been so like, and Notre Dame too, right? Very, very Catholic. So I think I just became so comfortable navigating unwelcoming spaces and being like comfortable in my own skin in unwelcoming spaces. And this is the first place that I think I've really spent an extended period of time in my life where like I feel so welcome and included. And it's been so encouraging. I remember like the first time I went to Yale Health to get, you know, my PrEP prescription, I walked in and there's like a sign in there about gender affirming care and how that's welcome and encouraged on Yale's campus. And that was like for me, like I've never lived in a state where that's been really allowed, right? I've had like a sticker on my water bottle here. It gets blurred out, but that's like says like say gay in protest of Ron DeSantis's Don't Say Gay bill. You know what I mean? So like I've just been from, you know, day one stepping onto campus, have been so encouraged by the culture, not only at SOM and the way that we build those spaces for people who are queer and who are closeted or exploring, but really just like the Yale community overall is so welcoming in that regard. It is also affectionately, in my opinion, affectionately nicknamed the Gay Ivy. So just make a note of that when you're considering which schools to apply to. But yeah, we also do along that note, like I get like some of the trips Ariel is mentioning. We can talk a little bit more about Ramba when it comes to professional development stuff, which I'm sure we'll talk about at some point today. That's a queer recruiting conference for queer MBA students. But we also do like plan fun retreats. So we do one in the winter, like in the spring, where we'll just like do somewhere local, get a house together, you know, play games and grab dinner. Went to Provincetown with a group of people over fall break a couple weeks ago. It's just a short 3.5, 4 hour drive from New Haven. So it was Women's Week. We went out there, had a great time. So we definitely find ways to like build spaces both in Evans Hall, around Yale's campus, and to find opportunities to escape the Yale bubble as well and really bond as a group. But that's a very long-winded response to that question, but I'll turn it back over to you, Michael.
No worries. Thank you. You all definitely do it right. I've heard about all these trips and houses that you book, and they sound so fun. And you pick like the most picturesque weekends to do it. So well done. I will say, you all bring up this name out of office. And I think one of the first things I loved about Yale when I joined was the idea that every school had their own sort of version of the LGBTQ club name. So you got out of office, outlaws, outpatients, out in the woods. Obviously, these are like different schools at Yale, like the School of Medicine, the law school, so on and so forth. And I thought that was such an incredibly bonding piece of the culture. And the fact that centrally we have the LGBTQ Resource Center, which is run by Sam. And I've heard that that's been a really powerful place on campus to empower our students and partner. When I used to work in the Office of Inclusion and Diversity, I think I was on the phone with Sam at least once a week to just sort of figure out what do we need to do and how can we improve things around these parts. And so I love that you folks bring that up. And with that in mind, as students at SOM, I think there are lots of structures and frameworks in place that sort of create community beyond your identities, right? And I'm sort of thinking almost immediately about your cohorts and your learning teams and maybe some of the pre-MBA recruitment partnerships that you all are a part of. And so, beyond all of those things, I'd love to know how your Yale SOM journey has impacted your identity, both professionally and academically, if any of you are open to speaking to that.
I can kick us off a little bit. It's a good question. I think coming into SOM, I was obviously coming from the nonprofit space, and so I didn't have a ton of quantitative experience, and that was something that I was really nervous about coming in to SOM and kind of the business school context. And I found the learning teams and also the integrated perspectives of the core to be really helpful in terms of kind of navigating those courses that were more out of my comfort zone. And then I think also in terms of, we're talking kind of outside of affinity groups, but in terms of intersectionality, I'm also in consortium and MLT, and I found a lot of support in those groups as well, kind of navigating my own sense of identity and how to hold all of the different kind of pieces of myself that I associate with. I think, yeah, my learning team has been super helpful. I've also been involved in the nonprofit board fellows program, which kind of helped me to continue to stay in the nonprofit space and get involved in the New Haven community. Tech Club was really helpful in navigating the internship process. And so there's been a lot of kind of groups outside of the affinity groups that have been really helpful in kind of shaping my career after SOM and also my experience kind of here, rounding out my expertise and knowledge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Do you want to go or? Okay, yeah, just adding on to that, I think, just building a relationship with people in the MBA class, but also in your cohort, which is the people you have class with in the first year, and then in your learning team, which is your small group, which you do homework with. You meet a lot of different people. Everyone has very different backgrounds, and I guess I always before SOM, I always felt maybe a little different, just be younger, international, moving abroad, sexual identity as well. And maybe I always felt a little different, but I feel in Yale SOM, everyone has such a unique background. It's actually people are encouraging you to be yourself and be your unique self, I guess. So that really allowed me, I guess, to embrace who I was and not try to fit in something that I was not. So yeah, just really embracing who I was.
Yeah, I think, on the professional side of things, there are a lot of recruiting is really headed up by the student groups. And I think that there are pros and cons to that, but one really big pro about it, I think, is as you're for me, someone who's making a really hard pivot from big law to finance, and studying sociology and Spanish in undergrad, I literally had not taken a math class since high school. I tested out of my math requirements going into college. So it's been a decade. So now coming in here and being all right, now what's EBITDA? And how does that how does, depreciation affect the three financial statements? And I'm great, what are those? I it's having that kind of environment with students working together, having students really who know that information, like helping you teach it and learn it and navigate that recruiting process, for me was really disarming because, again, like I said, wanting to make this pivot to finance, but don't love how the finance culture can be sometimes. I think it was really disarming and allowed me to like come to the process really like with my like full authentic self, because I feel like I can be more transparent with students than I can, like with professionals and coffee chats, or even, with some people, like who are just like older and who aren't like in my exact same shoes, right? It's a lot easier to like feel disarmed and be vulnerable with other students who are going through that same professional development journey with you. And that's something that I really appreciated about the Yale SOM culture, is it allowed me to like do that professional development and to do it in lockstep with other students, where like I can let my guard down and really preach transparent about how my process is going and how I'm doing along the journey. I also think too, so I'm also a member, I applied through QuestBridge, which is for for, if you're not familiar, it's for like low income, high achieving students, a lot of first gen students. It used to just be for high school students applying to undergrads, but they now have an application for MBA programs, which is how I applied to Yale. And then connected with that, Yale has a first gen low income group. So like that said is, like I like coming from a low income family, coming to Yale, going to Notre Dame was one thing, but then coming to Yale was, I think, like just surprising, like the pipelines of recruiting from, like you show up at the school, you have the name, you put the name on your resume, and then all of a sudden people at Goldman Sachs like are willing to talk to you. It's like, it's just such a different world to be navigating than anything that I had grown up with. And when I talk to my parents, it just like blows their mind, like they can't relate to it, and neither can my siblings and the people that I grew up with, right? It's just a very different world. And having, again, like the first gen low income group and people who can like relate to where you're coming from, both in that personal sense, but as you're going through this professional development journey and learning how to navigate a world that's totally different planet from what you're used to, was just so reassuring, especially, as you're going through a very stressful process. Really made what made like what otherwise would have been a very like unbearable process very bearable and easy. Not easy, like, right, there's a lot of work that goes into it, but very navigable, I would say.
Thank you. And as you all were speaking, and let's stick on this topic of like your next chapter, right? I was reminded at how much attention we pay as a committee reading applications to the different involvements that applicants have in their workplaces and in the spaces of DEIB and ERGs and different groups that they can support. And so if you were wondering, you should totally include all of that in your applications. It's super helpful to us in our process in terms of gauging who you are. But also, our mission is to educate leaders for business and society. And yes, you all go through a core, you get a world-class curriculum, and you get all the advantages that Trey just finished mentioning in terms of network and just ability and access, right? And so I'm curious to know, have any particular things shaped you? And do any of you all plan to continue this idea of LGBTQ advocacy when you return back to the workplace? And Pauline, before I release this question to you all, you are a Silver Scholar, right?
Yeah, I'm a Silver Scholar, so I'll be working next year, but yeah, finishing the MBA in a few years.
Awesome. So for those of you who don't know, and I'll repeat the question because I think it's valuable to share this perspective, but another layer of complexity that we love to add into building our student body is our Silver Scholars program, right? Which is an MBA. The only difference being that our Silver Scholars have to, or excuse me, don't have to have the amount of work experience that a typical MBA applicant does, right? The caveat being that they have to be extremely strong performers in every other aspect of their application and have a really clear, drawn out plan for their career before they've ever truly worked. And so that's how they're able to be successful in this program. So Pauline, you being here, please let me reiterate, is a big deal, my friend. But what that does in our community is it gives us sometimes up to 50 students who are just fresh out of undergrad, which is really amazing when you put them into this space of 200, or excuse me, 300 people who have been working for 5 to 6 years, right? And they just bring an edge, I think, and a challenge to the community to think and stay up to date, even and to study and know what to do, right? So all that to say, the three of these lovely people are headed to the workforce, and Pauline may be headed there for a year to a few years before returning to finish their MBA. But what is it? Do you want to continue to engage? Has there been any experiences while you've been here that have shaped you and really pushed you into this idea of continuing to build culture and community in your workplaces? It took me a long time to get that out, but I did.
Yeah, I think, you know, for me, I was pretty heavily involved with our with the Pride group at the firm I was at before. We were pretty like we did big law type work, but compared to other firms, we were like one of the smaller ones, and we didn't have any openly queer attorneys, which was really difficult. Yeah, and it was so our chief people officer was openly gay, but we didn't have any like openly queer attorneys. So, you know, there were definitely a lot of issues like with the culture there. And I think, you know, I saw that as an opportunity to really like dive into the work that like the Pride group that was headed up by Roger, our chief people officer, and then other people within the Pride group really saw that as an opportunity to like, you know, dive in and like do what we could to change the culture. And that's something that I've definitely, you know, and after having those opportunities, was very excited to join the SOM out of office group and get involved here, but obviously like with a very different connotation that like it's, you know, a much more queer place and a much more welcoming and open environment than the one that I was coming from. But yes, like I think, you know, I think out of office has definitely provided me with opportunities to like really, you know, build community and, you know, like really engage really in like and have like deep meaningful conversations with allies or with straight people who might not, you know, who aren't allies, but like want to learn and like want to at least engage in a dialogue. I think like being in out of office, like again, like as somebody who's become comfortable navigating some uncomfortable spaces, being like in this public position for me has provided me with opportunities to like really engage in meaningful conversations and some difficult conversations and the ways that I did in the workplace before. And I definitely think that's like so meaningful. I think, you know, going into banking and going into Charlotte, you know, which is like a pretty purple area, I'm excited to like dive into that work. I think that like my past experiences, both at Yale and you know, in my workplace before, have really provided me with some wonderful opportunities to build community with allies and with queer people, you know, who like are on the same page as us, but have also provided me with some really unique opportunities to again engage in some of those difficult conversations and do what I can to advocate for positive change. And definitely looking forward to joining Wells Fargo's ERG when I join again this summer. Very active, very large queer group with Wells Fargo's queer group in Charlotte. That's like their biggest location. So like was able to engage in it while I was with them there over the summer. So absolutely loved it. Wonderful community. And so looking forward to diving into it when I get there.
Along those lines, I was part of the Queer ERG at Microsoft over the summer when I interned there and actually got to help from kind of like the employer side with the Rhomba trek that happened to various tech companies in Seattle. And so that was also like really fun to kind of get to see everyone coming into the MBA programs from the employer side of things. I will say like the one thing that I feel like I notice in a lot of MBA contexts is that there are not very many femme identifying queer people in those contexts. And so I feel like I've been so heartened at Yale that like I feel like there is a ton of femme representation in the queer community, but at Microsoft I was usually like the only woman in those groups and rooms. And so I'm really excited to also kind of like try to build that presence out further when I get there. And that's something that I'm really looking forward to as well.
Yeah, and I was also in the career at Accenture, planning on going again when I join again. But yeah, I think two main takeaways, and again, I've only been in the MBA for like 3 months, so pretty recent, but still two big takeaways to encourage inclusion in the workplace. I think the first one is just like gaining the confidence of being your true self, just because everyone's like all the other students and professors are interested in your perspective and just like knowing what you have to say, regardless of your background, because everyone has different background, and that's what brings value to the MBA, in my opinion. And the second was so taking the managing groups and team core course. That's one of the core courses in the MBA that you'll take in the first year. So we did an exercise which was basically a case study with our learning teams, and then we recorded ourselves. And the point of the exercise was then you watch yourself and see how the team interacts with each other. And that's some great takeaway to understand, you know, what the dynamic of the group is and how you can foster more inclusion in discussion. So like you make a note of, you know, who's gonna maybe like speak less in the discussion and how you can encourage each other. So that was a great takeaway and a great moment to ask other people in the team, like, okay, how can I, you know, give more voice to you and just make you more feel comfortable sharing your voice, because that's what we want to hear. So that was a big takeaway in, you know, how to bring more inclusion in discussions and getting value from that.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm sure that's a distant memory in Trey and Ariel's mind right now, but it's nice to get that refresher of what it might look like and what you'll experience as soon as you get here. And so as we wrap up the panel discussion for the evening and we prepare to transition into breakout rooms, I'd love to pose this question to each of you. Put yourselves back in the shoes of an applicant for a moment. Put your identity is at the forefront of your mind. And tell us what you'd encourage us to think about and weigh at this point in their MBA journeys. And you can take a sec to think about.
Yeah, I think like what I would say is like when you're filling out your application, right? And I don't know, I can't speak on behalf of admissions, so Michael, you let me know if anything that I say is out of line. But like, when I think of like when I'm like thinking to myself, like, okay, like what is it that like admissions would be looking for from me? Like now that I'm here and I like have made it to where I'm at, like in my mind, I'm thinking like, okay, they want to know like why it is that you're applying, why it is that like this is the school that's going to help you get to where it is that you want to go, where is it that you want to go, and why this school over another, and how are you of like all the hundreds of people that are applying, like how is it that you are going to be the person that like brings that special something, if that makes sense, that like contributes and like adds to this community that, you know, we've really fostered and building, you know, like we keep talking about how we spend a lot of energy in like fostering community and building professional development in an inclusive way, right? There are like a lot of things that we focus on, and that's something that like really the school's mission people really do bite into. So when you're thinking about like how your identity impacts that and as a part of your application, I would really think about like SOM's mission for building leaders of business and society, and like think of like the points that we've discussed today about the community, about the professional development, and doing it in like a loving and inclusive way. And how has your identity and your experiences as a queer individual informed or shaped you in such a way that you will be able to meaningfully contribute and build upon that in both like the personal and professional sense. That's what like as if I were back in your shoes, that's what I would be like when it comes to like my career identity. That's what would be thinking of and like thinking of framing it.
Yeah, so I was in those shoes like 6 months ago, so but yeah, the way I went about it was really just thinking, okay, so who am I, what makes me me, and then where do I want to go? It was more like a personal introspection, personal reflection of who I was in the first place. I think you do need to make some time to understand like who you are, what makes you who you are, and where you want to go. I think that's the part you shouldn't rush and just like really think about what you want and what you want out of the MBA and what makes you yourself. And I think the more your essays and application can showcase who you are and like just the more personal you can make it, the better story it will be. Yeah.
I feel like this is such a hard question. Like, there's no silver bullet, but I'm trying to think like you're like a multidimensional person. Like something that I was thinking about was like, okay, I worked at ARP. Like, how many people can speak to like older people's issues in the classroom? Like, think about like, okay, like now I'm in a classroom. Like, I worked on this project. Like, that's a specific thing that I did, or like my career has been focused on like this kind of narrative, like this larger narrative of like mine is like tech and impact in society. So like, what does impact in society mean? It means like tech and people with disabilities, tech and older adults, tech and marginalized communities such as queer communities, people of color. Like, so I feel like you like think about kind of like your kind of career trajectory and then like how your kind of like perspective on that impacts what you're trying to do. But definitely like, I don't know, I guess highlight all of your identities, like highlight like all of the things that make you you and like beyond, like also highlight your affinity groups because there's no way that we're going to know unless you highlight them. Like it's important. We want, I don't know, this may be out of pocket, but then like we want queer people at these schools. And so like highlight that, like let people know and like highlight any other perspective that you feel like makes you specifically yourself in that application somewhere so that you can kind of like give yourself the best chance at everyone seeing the full picture of who you are in your application.
That was actually really amazing. Thank you. And if I might just summarize, I think what I'm hearing from each of you is really that the application at Yale is going to require some self-reflection, right, on all different fronts. But the other side of that is Yale is obviously a place that wants to hear what you've gleaned from that self-reflection, right? And so be free and be willing to be authentic in your application. And trust that our AOs and our team are ready to fully digest that and create a community like the one you see on this screen. And so I really appreciate that. And thank you all so much for the time on the panel.